Peace be upon you and God's mercy and blessings and grace. I want to explain to you analysis and what is its role exactly. The main idea, or the idea exactly, is that I have this. The X-ray tube is positioned in the X-ray setup, and there is a patient below it. Under the patient, there is a detector. This detector starts receiving the transmitted photons from the patient, and then it begins to generate my image. The process of conversion from transmitted photons to the image takes place, and we send the image to the documentation. Here comes the role of Fourier analysis, as it converts the signals you have received into an image, a visual representation. But how does this happen? Now I have received different signals, and essentially, the first thing we need to understand is a very important point. The detector is positioned here, and you want to detect the burning sensation as the body moves in a circle. This body was close to you at this point, and then it started to move. So at this point, if you say that this body was close to you, you can assign it a high value because it is very close to you. Therefore, the intensity that reaches you from it, or your ability in the process, is significant, and thus you can detect it effectively at this point. It starts by giving a very strong signal here, which is far from you, as far as it can be. Then it descends to the point and returns again to your point. So what have I done? I have rotated this object 360 degrees, starting from here, moving here, and then moving back. So, if we assume that this is 0, this is 90 degrees, this is 270, and this is 360. How is the angle here? It was 0, and when it reached 90 degrees, it will be. I'm sorry, here is 180, here is 72. Then it goes back to the position which is 360, so it becomes 0. 90 degrees, 180 degrees. Okay, and then it goes back to rotate again. So, what do you want to say? I want to say that my signal, which is received by the image receptor, does the same thing. What does that mean? Does it do the same thing? I mean, the one that is received by my detector. It has a certain intensity, and I can represent the signal as a sine wave, where I can represent the signal as a sine wave that is received by the detector, or the transmitted photon as a sine wave. Now, when the receptor comes, what will it receive? It will receive a signal. I have a strong signal coming in, and another signal coming in with weak intensity. So, I have different signals. For example, if I have bone, air, and soft tissue. So, the transmitted signal from the bone will end up being weak. Why will it be weak? Because at that time, the bone has high absorption efficiency. It will absorb the intensity of the radiation coming from it, which will be weak. Therefore, its intensity is weak. What does it mean that its intensity is weak? It means its strength is weak, which means its amplitude is weak. So, what will its signal look like? It will look like this. So this is my thing. Well, if it represents the height of itself, As for the air, no. The air will be large like this. My thing is big. Just a bit in text. There are 3 signals that can be positioned in different positions, such as, for example, in various locations. This is the signal, and we play with it like this. This is the time, and this is the amplitude. This is the time, and this is the amplitude. I want to combine the 3 signals together. Let's assume I have the smallest signal, then a larger signal, and then the signal in the middle. I want to say that the combination of the 3 signals is what reaches the image receptor. This means that the receptor does not receive each signal individually. Rather, it receives all the signals from where? From the bone, the soft tissue, and all parts of the human body. Its role is to respond to these signals, decode them, and return them to your specific signals. How is this done? We need to return the signal to the 3 different signals. How is this done? As I mentioned, the math can analyze all the signals that come to it. How does it analyze them? The first signal that comes to it is called the time domain. It means that it comes to him at different times. It comes to him at different times. Therefore, the characteristics of the signal must be displayed in order for them to perform the differentiation. How does it do that? If we assume that this is the signal coming from the bone, and this is the signal coming from the air, and this is the signal coming from the soft tissue, let's assume that all 3 are equal in frequency, meaning all 3 have the same repetition of cycles per second. So if we convert from the time domain, in the frequency domain, if you want to present the signal from its form in the time domain to its form in the correlation, how will you do this? By using Fourier transformation. The signal is here, and the amplitude is small. Let's assume the frequency is high. If the frequency is high, you would place it here. For example, if the amplitude was 1, and the frequency was, say, 3 cycles per second, here my amplitude is 3, and the frequency is 1 cycle per second. If you want to represent this, the amplitude is 3, and the frequency is 1 cycle per second. So the amplitude is large here. From the number 3, let's say the frequency is 2, and the amplitude is 2. You come to represent this signal as 2. It stays here. The 3 come together. What does it do? In the end, it gives you a curve like this. Here is the frequency of the bone, or the signal of the bone, and here is your signal. Here are 2, and this is the signal coming from the air. So what did you do? I decomposed the signal coming to me into the 2 different domains. This is the meaning of the word from, the time, domain 2, the frequency, domain. This remains like this. This is the role. So why have I transformed? It told you that if I have something in the human body, as we said, we are talking about things that are close to each other. In this way, all of this represents something, and the space next to it is empty, or something. So when we were talking earlier and said that you could transform this object, why are you transforming it? This is called a spatial thing that you are transforming into what? How? As I said, you can measure your lines per length, per distance. How many lines per centimeter? How many lines per millimeter? Here, for example, we will say there are 4 lines per centimeter. If I increase the number of these lines and make it like this, for example, 8 lines, then it becomes 4 lines per centimeter. And here it is, 8 lines per centimeter. You are thus transforming from the spatial domain to the frequency domain. The 4 line pairs are done. What does it express? How many line pairs per distance unit? In this way, you are talking about the spatial domain. Here, there are 8 line pairs per centimeter. This is talking about the spatial domain. In order to transform this to frequency, as I mentioned, these 4 will have a low frequency. Here, the amplitude of it will be related to what? It will be related to itself. There is a significant difference between the line and the one next to it. The amplitude will be large or my contrast will be high. Here, it's the same thing. So let's assume that I have it in this form. And this is regarding the background. So my signal will be like this. Okay. We have increased. Okay, let's assume that there is a big Americube here. The line pairs are transformed from their shape in the spatial domain to the frequency domain. This means you are converting them from their original form, which is done by those who perform the Fourier transform in order to calculate later. Here is why I need this information, so that I can later calculate from it to create my equation or my curve that accurately represents the data. This is crucial for understanding the underlying patterns or trends, or to derive my curve in this specific way, ensuring precision and reliability in my analysis. Okay, well, so what do? Essentially, they take your signal and convert it from the frequency domain. Okay, now I have a set of signals that I divided by frequency and amplitude and all that. Let's agree on something very important. Here is your picture. In noise, you might find some noise present. It varies depending on what you are capturing. This means that there is something in between, in the example of your organs, such as the heart, lungs, and kidneys. The boundaries of images. For example, the brain, for instance, is supposed to be talking about the brain or discussing something like organs, for example. For example, the spine has its edge where you feel. There is a high variation in your pixel values and rapid repetition, like in this noise area. This is referred to as high frequency when I convert it from the spatial domain to the frequency domain. So, what do? In this case, it takes high frequency. While your object is flowing, for example, how your prison looks, it appears like this. But in the large prison, it represents differently. When you try to convert it, it will be normal in your image when you convert from the frequency domain. On the place where I am actually taking from, I mean, if I am taking from something that exists, then this represents low frequency. If it has a brush, then that's fine. I have signals where noise is always represented by high frequency and my object is represented by low frequency. So, if you want to perform filtration, what does that mean? It means you want to remove the noise, which means you need to eliminate the high frequency. If you want to enhance the sharpness of the image, then you keep the high frequency. Therefore, the filtering you use on the image is essentially about removing some frequencies. If you want to remove the noise, you eliminate the high frequency. And if you want to increase sharpness, you keep it. There is always a filter called the sharp filter that is commonly used. What does the bus do in the neighborhood? What does it pass through to make it what? It means it keeps it in a way that balances the hair. As for the one who told you no, what do I call that? What does it do for you? It passes through and removes what? It removes what is present in your area. Explain the difference between a high-pass filter and a low-pass filter and how they relate to the frequency you will be working on. All right, so this is Fourier analysis in short. Let me tell you an important point. I have high frequency and low frequency. There is another point regarding the amplitude, which is the strength of the signal coming to you. The amplitude is something we will cover later in the area called K-space. The K-space is where you essentially store your signal. This K-space inherently exists in two dimensions, which are the X and Y axes of anything in the world. The X and Y axes. Take your signal and start placing it in the K-space. High frequencies are always stored at the periphery, on the edges, while low frequencies are stored in the center. So, high frequency is stored at the edges in the periphery of the K-space, and low frequency is stored in the center. You will find that the K-space has dots behind the brightness of these dots, which is related to the amplitude of the signal itself. The higher the amplitude of the signal, meaning the higher the intensity, the more brightness you get. If the brightness is low, then your signal will be affected. What happens next when it starts to convert this image? By whom? By something called every image has, or every point has, and it starts to convert it for you from the image of what. This process involves a complex mechanism where each image or point is analyzed and transformed into a different form, providing a new perspective or understanding. It is likely that the second line is in a specific location around the one present in its image. This is done using important information in Fourier analysis.